This is Zack Kendley, the rejected fourth son of a bankrupt baron. One day, this imposing army of knights was marching toward a battle that in their minds was already won. But all that confidence quickly crumbled, because standing before them, Zack's bizarre group started tearing through the front lines with ease. But to understand how it all began, we need to go back in time, to the exact moment a spoiled noblewoman simply decided to call off their engagement. Irritated by his silence, the girl steps right up to his face and asks if he's gone deaf. Letting out a mocking laugh, she turns her back and tells the poor guy to learn his place. Those humiliating words were enough to ruin the young man's life, sending him straight to the bottom of the social ladder. Zack was only 14 years old and had faced prejudice since childhood for having black eyes, something considered a strong sign of misfortune in his lands. Even though he was hated by everyone, he had somehow landed a miracle engagement with the daughter of a marquis, but that whole arrangement only existed thanks to his late grandfather's efforts. And the moment the old man passed away, Zack's life fell apart completely. His own father, who used to pretend to care about the boy only because of his interest in the arranged marriage, didn't take long to reveal his true, monstrous face. Without an ounce of pity, the father throws his own son out of the house, ordering the boy to live in a rundown barn full of cobwebs and leaks. With nowhere to go, the poor boy throws himself into a pile of dirty straw. Still, he tries to comfort himself, thinking that living in that misery was still a little better than becoming a homeless commoner. But he knew time was running out, because once he turned 15, he'd be considered an adult and inevitably kicked off those lands. Realizing he couldn't count on anyone in his family anymore, the boy finally stands up. From that night on, he started training with his sword non-stop, striking tree trunks with all his strength. His father always laughed at him, saying that people with black eyes would never have the talent to master any classic elemental magic. But fate had other plans, and during training, the boy notices that his blade starts giving off a mysterious energy. Focusing his mind, he tries to understand what that strange aura was capable of, and how he could use that power to his advantage. That's when, with a single swing, he cuts a massive tree trunk clean in half like it was made of paper. With that, Zack awakened two unique abilities: body reinforcement and blade enhancement. Even doubting whether that power would be useful in a real fight against monsters, he swears to himself that he'll never give up. The boy spends a long time training, leaving behind a trail of hundreds of felled trees. Zack reflects that he's been training there since he was 7, and that the surrounding forest was already starting to look empty. Clenching his fist, our hero decides to test his true strength in real combat. So he heads toward the mysterious southern woods, but finds the total silence of the place strange. It seemed way too calm. Spotting a huge tree, he decides to use it for a quick warm-up, but he's caught off guard by a deafening roar. Right before his eyes, a colossal creature with stone scales appears, so massive it makes the boy look like an ant. The monster attacks, forcing Zack to dodge at the last second. That's when the creature asks him if he wants power. Completely dazed, the boy can barely think straight. The next instant, the shadow transforms into the figure of a beautiful and terrifying woman. Zack rubs his eyes, trying to regain his senses and figure out whether that bizarre vision was real or just fear playing tricks on him. To make things worse, the monster gives his face a slimy lick, driving the poor boy even deeper into panic over all that madness. That's when the voice demands an immediate answer, whether he really wanted that power or not. With no time to think, Zack decides to accept the call with everything he's got. With all his strength, he shouts that he wants more power, and with that, an invisible crushing force slams into the stone monster. The voice then reveals it's granting him the legendary magic of gravity. And to finish the job, sharp stone pillars start shooting up rapidly from the ground. In the blink of an eye, the sharp spikes pierce the creature's body without mercy. The voice then reveals the name of the second deadly technique it just used: the legendary magic of creation. Zack can't believe he now possesses two magics considered legendary and lost to time. But the voice sarcastically corrects him, saying those aren't just like legends. They are the legends themselves. Still very confused, Zack demands the mysterious entity reveal who it is and where it's hiding. That's when the voice tells the boy to look right below his feet. Looking down, our hero comes face to face with a little round creature. The tiny slime asks him directly if the boy would like to form a contract with him. I'd accept without a second thought. The little monster introduces himself as Sura and repeats the offer, insisting that the partnership would be extremely beneficial for both of them. He guarantees there'd be no downside for the boy, and that the perks of teaming up with him would be huge. To prove his worth, Sura points to the enormous corpse of the stone creature, reminding him who was responsible for that devastating attack. He's referring to the gravity and creation magic that just wiped out the colossal monster. Still processing everything he just saw, Zack asks for a moment to breathe and think it over before making a decision. But the slime gets completely fed up, complaining that there's nothing to think about when you're being offered legendary magic for free. Zack figures that either way, his fate was to rot in a cold ditch if he stayed in that misery, so maybe it was worth risking it all. In that moment, painful memories of every humiliation and insult he'd suffered for his black eyes come rushing back. And with that, he asks if the slime is really sure he wants to team up with someone as rejected and washed up as he is. Annoyed by the boy's drama, Sura leaps against Zack's stomach, shouting that he's not there to mess around. The slime insists he wants to seal the contract already and questions why the boy is taking so long to accept the obvious. Seeing the little creature's determination, the young man finally gives in, and Sura instructs him to give himself a small cut on the finger and press it to his forehead. The pact is sealed in a bright flash of light, and the little monster tells him, mentally, that they can now talk through telepathy. That's when a young family maid named Malmus appears, looking relieved to have found Zack, her master, there in the forest. She approaches quickly and lets him know that the head of the family is summoning the boy back to the main mansion immediately. Zack tenses up at the news of his father's summons. Meanwhile, Sura starts grumbling like an animal. Turns out the slime had a pretty dirty mind, and starts complaining telepathically about the maid's modest uniform, which leaves the boy completely embarrassed. Trying to brush off the awkwardness of his new partner's jokes, our hero thanks her for the message and decides to head back to the mansion. When he enters the main hall, he's met with looks full of contempt from his father and his hateful brothers. Wasting no time, the patriarch announces that the boy has come of age and that he's already found the perfect job for him. Without a shred of compassion, the man stares straight at his son and orders him bluntly to go to war. He explains that the neighboring lands have been invaded by enemy forces and that Zack's mission will be to lead reinforcements to the front lines. His brothers start laughing because they know that was just the perfect excuse to send the useless bastard straight to a slaughterhouse. Listening in on the whole conversation from inside the boy's mind, Sura catches on to the trap right away and comments on the terrible cruelty of that family. With a sadistic smile, the oldest brother steps up and grabs Zack's face, warning him not to shame the clan's name in battle. He whispers that if Zack even thinks about fleeing the battlefield, he'll kill him himself. With that, the rest of the group bursts into laughter, mocking the situation and telling the boy to die like a disposable warrior for the good of the clan, bottling up his fury in complete silence. The young man just accepts the order, but he swears he'll fight with everything he's got and won't run. As he walks out of the room, the family keeps muttering insults behind his back, cursing the boy's black eyes. Once he's outside, Sura mentally praises him for his brave attitude, and the boy thanks his partner for the support. And so, at only 14 years old, and without the slightest support from his own family, our boy is forced into adulthood, marching off to war at the head of an army, made up of nothing but old and weak men. Looking at the soldiers by his side, Zack sees through his father's trap and wonders if they'd even make it out of a real fight alive. But Sura tells him not to lose hope, promising to use the trip to teach him extremely powerful magic. The slime points out that this situation is the perfect chance to turn things around, gain military reputation, and shut everyone up. Later, around a campfire, Sura explains that before learning the legendary magics, he needs to focus on strengthening specific parts of his body. The first lesson is to concentrate energy in his own eyes. His partner explains that having perfect night vision and long-range sight is vital on a battlefield. And so the young man starts channeling the flow of energy, but quickly realizes that funneling magic just to the area around his eyes is incredibly difficult. That's when an imposing warrior walks over, asking if the boy was practicing his magic control. The man introduces himself in a friendly way as Karman, an experienced veteran warrior who was also part of that reinforcement unit. Zack explains his goal, and the soldier reveals that, even though he doesn't use spells, he learned in the past that mental imagery is the key to mastering any kind of energy. Karman advises the young man to clearly picture the exact effect he wants to achieve before trying to release his magic. And Sura fully agrees with the warrior's tip, pointing out that a clear mental image cuts down on energy use and boosts power. Very grateful for the valuable advice, Zack starts to wonder who this experienced and mysterious fighter really was. Suddenly, Karman shifts his stance and goes completely on alert. He warns that there are monsters nearby and decides to go take them on alone, but before heading out, asks if the boy has ever taken a life. Zack answers timidly that he's never done such a thing, admitting he didn't even have the heart to kill a bug. That's when Karman warns him that war is kill or be killed, and that witnessing the horror of death can easily break a rookie's mind. He advises the boy to face the monsters first, so he can slowly get used to the bloodlust and the smell of battle. But mustering his courage, Zack asks if it would be alright for him to take the front line and fight them. The warrior is surprised by such determination, but responds that he'll do as his young master commands. Even so, he points out that the boy has a very gentle temperament, and advises him to use a firmer, more authoritative tone when he's around other soldiers. The soldiers in the rear quickly panic as they realize the young master has advanced completely on his own. Suddenly, a terrifying muscular orc bursts out from the bushes, but in one quick motion, the monster retreats into the dense shadows of the trees. Zack realizes the creature pulled back on purpose to the pitch black, since those monsters are much more used to fighting in the dark than he is. Listening to the sounds around him, Sura tells the boy to activate the eye magic already before it's too late. Our hero tries to channel the spell, but the magic fails, and the monster drops down on him from the treetops by surprise. On pure instinct, Zack swings his sword and manages to slice the orc in half, staring at the blood dripping from his blade. The boy freezes at the bizarre feeling of having taken a life. Sura shouts at him to focus on his eyes, and Zack remembers Karman's advice, trying to mentally visualize the exact effect of his visual magic. Focusing all his determination, he pushes his energy and imagines perfect vision. With the ability finally activated, the darkness scatters and reveals an entire pack of orcs. The forest looks as bright as day, letting him easily see every move, weakness, and breath of those terrifying beasts. He can even spot the frenzied, murderous expressions on the creatures' faces before they charge at him. Without hesitating, our boy jumps into combat. Now, Zack was ready to plow through any threat in front of him. From a distance, the old soldiers in the unit weren't sure if he'd come back alive, but in just a few moments the boy was already standing in the middle of a pile of orc corpses he'd taken out himself. The men run toward him, shouting and celebrating, unable to believe the young master had taken out that whole pack on his own. Carmen quickly shouts for all the men to start harvesting the beasts' bodies. Zack is confused by the term harvesting, and Carmen explains that parts of those monsters are worth a good chunk of money. He explains that the meat, the magic stone, and even the orcs' testicles are highly valuable goods that merchants are eager to buy. Still in shock over everything he'd been through that night, the boy just rests his head against Carmen's armor. Carmen places his hands on the young man's shoulders and asks if that was his first real fight, and so, with the first battle of his life finally won, Carmen wraps the boy in a warm cloak near the campfire. But the rest doesn't last long, because screams echo through the camp again when another pack of monsters decides to launch a surprise attack. The old men panic, but Zack grabs his sword and charges forward without hesitation to protect his troop once again. He immediately activates his vision-enhancing magic, letting him clearly see every detail and movement in the darkness. Our boy dodges with agility and slices through his enemies, while Suura tells him mentally to only use the eye reinforcement so he doesn't waste energy. Zack easily predicts the paths of several rocks thrown at him, dodging every one and counterattacking in the same instant. Next, the young man predicts the swing of a huge stone axe and gets ready to dodge. Thinking the makeshift axe would break easily, Zack blocks the blow, but to his horror, it's his own sword that ends up snapping in half. Disarmed and completely defenseless, the boy closes his eyes and braces for the worst, but the enemy's attack just stops. The next instant, the monster's head splits perfectly in half. The one who landed the killing blow was Carmen himself. The experienced warrior comments that the weapon was awful quality, a real piece of junk. Zack quickly picks up on his father's cruelty. He gave him a flimsy weapon on purpose to make sure he'd die. Carmen tries to comfort the young lord, promising that once they get to the city and sell off the beast spoils, they'll buy him a decent sword. While they were talking, the veteran slices apart several orcs, trying to sneak up on them, without taking a single step or even looking at his enemies. The rest of the old troop is speechless at witnessing such mastery, realizing that warrior was on a surreal level of power. Carmen takes charge and orders the men to group up and pick off the isolated beasts, making sure to protect the young lord. Following his tactics, the troop easily takes down the monsters. After wiping out every threat that came their way, the group finally spots their destination. Before them rose the enormous mansion of Count Boss, a monumental territory, much larger than the Kendley clan's own lands. From high up in one of the imposing mansion's windows, a nobleman watched that peculiar troop arrive. He's outraged at what he sees, complaining that he was expecting real reinforcement warriors, not a bunch of old men led by a child. Resting his hand on his chin, the Count tries to figure out what the Kendley clan's real plan was in sending such a ridiculous group to war. Announced by the guards, Zack formally enters the main hall, introducing himself as the son sent to provide the necessary military support. However, as he crosses the threshold, the boy unconsciously gives off an intimidating pressure that puts the Count on full alert. Ignoring the tension, Zack politely bows before the nobleman's desk, still surprised by that mysterious aura. The man tries to compose himself and formally introduces himself as Count Dunkel Boss. Getting straight to the point, Dunkel Boss says the number of soldiers sent is far too small, and asks what the Kendley clan's intent was with that. Zack then hands over a sealed envelope, explaining that he brought an official letter, personally written by his father, to clear everything up. The nobleman reads that Patriarch Hendrik claims to be gravely ill, and that he had to allocate his best troops to contain threats on his own lands. But Zack knows very well that all of that is a lie, because his coward of a father just made up fake rumors to send him alone straight to his death. Then, the Count points out that Zack is still only a child, but our boy counters that his coming-of-age ceremony took place the day before, and that he should be considered an adult. With that, he accepts the young man and decides that they'll set out for enemy territory in 2 days, letting Zack rest at the secondary residence until then. Zack thanks him for the hospitality and leaves the great office, being escorted out alongside Carmen. The moment the door closes, the old man starts sweating nervously, remembering the unbelievable magical pressure he felt coming off the boy. The Count reflects on how utterly foolish the noble Kellis was to cancel the engagement, caring only about his surface-level status. And he knows that Zack's father despised him for being the fourth son, firmly believing he'd never inherit any title of value. Which led him to conclude that, depending on how the battle plays out, the best path would be to try to win the young man's trust and bring him to his side. Dunkel Boss thinks that, if all goes well, his family would gain a formidable ally unmatched in the entire kingdom. However, as the two walked through the garden, the Count's mind stayed uneasy over one crucial detail about the reinforcement group. He was wondering why the legendary sword saint was acting as a mere assistant to that boy. Far from there, our hero's journey continues through the busy streets of the village. Carmen suggests they use their downtime to sell the orc parts they collected and buy a proper sword for the next battle. Seeing how shy the boy is about business, the warrior asks if he's ever sold anything before. Following the veteran's directions, they soon arrive at the local pawn shop to negotiate their goods. The merchant puts on his glasses, and starts inspecting the monster spoils very closely. Zach's expectations were high, but the merchant fakes a sad look and says that, unfortunately, he can't pay a good price for those materials. He tries to trick the boy by claiming that the war makes trade difficult, suggesting they swap the spoils for one of the old used swords in his shop. Because of his inexperience, Zach almost buys the lie, thinking there really wasn't another option because of the conflict. But Carmon jumps in sarcastically, calling out the lie. The warrior explains that scarce resources in wartime actually make prices skyrocket in what they call combat value. He glares at the con artist and tells him to stop trying to pull one over on his young master just because he's a kid. Terrified of getting a beating from the giant, the merchant is forced to hand over a beautiful, brand new sword, sharp and shining. Admiring the new blade, the boy smiles as he realizes it's leagues better than the piece of junk his cursed father had given him. Zach thanks his mentor deeply for always having his back. As the two walked on, a hidden figure was tailing them through the alleys. Sensing the threat, Sura warns Zach about the enemy and tells the boy to play it cool and pretend not to notice. Carmen asks if the young master also picked up on the hidden presence, and Zach confirms. Hidden in the shadows, the one tailing them panics when she realizes. The two noticed her approach before she could even try to attack. The veteran instructs his young master never to make the first move. That's when, right in front of them on that deserted street, a mysterious hooded figure appears wearing a white cloak. She moves at high speed, flanking them from behind in the blink of an eye, but the experienced veteran reacts fast and throws himself at the hooded figure. On impact, the figure loses her balance and lands right on top of Zach. And well, in the middle of that clumsy fall, Zach's hand accidentally ends up on the mysterious spy's chest. The two start yelling in embarrassment, and for some reason, Carmon already knew her from somewhere. Zach tries to figure out who she is, but to his shock, the young woman ignores him and charges straight at the veteran to attack. But Carmen dodges the blows with mastery, making the girl even more furious that she can't land a single hit. Even though he looks relaxed while dodging, the warrior starts losing his patience with her persistence. He puts the girl on his back and decides to make an explosive backflip, causing the poor girl's head to slam right into the trunk of a nearby tree. Zach is completely shocked by such brutality. But without giving her time to breathe, the veteran unleashes an insane sequence of rapid punches. But the force of the final blow sends the girl flying towards Zach, making the two of them collide again. And to the total horror of both of them, the fall makes their lips touch in an accidental kiss. Watching that whole embarrassing scene, Sura bursts into laughter and teases, saying the boy has a thing for aggressive women. The poor guy immediately complains to his partner, lamenting that his first kiss should have happened in a much more romantic moment. The next instant, Carmon grabs the girl by the collar. In tears, the giant apologizes on his knees to his lord, scolding the attacker for daring to lay a hand on the young master. Desperate over all that drama, Zach tells him to stop right now and demands to know who the hell that girl is. The warrior then reveals that her name is Jaska, his former disciple, and to Zach's surprise, his own niece. Still trying to process all of it, the young lord says he wasn't hurt and there's no need to punish anyone over it. Seeing his young master's enormous generosity, the veteran feels a bit more relieved. Placing his hand on the young woman's head, he announces that Jaska will be Zach's personal guard and will protect him with her life. Carmen brushes off his niece's grumbling and reveals that, despite her clumsy looks, she's actually an elite S-rank warrior. Well, our boy can barely believe that this lunatic belongs to such an absurd military rank. Turns out in that world, there are 3 major, highly influential guilds, and the top warrior rank is reserved only for real monsters. Zach starts wondering who Carmon really is to have taken down such a powerful warrior with such ease. Taking advantage of the giant's absence, the young man decides to ask Jaska directly if she was really on board with the partnership, and the girl just answers that it's all fine, as long as her incompetent master is around to keep an eye on things. Of course, that little pest Sura doesn't miss the chance to tease, whispering that the girl definitely fell for Zach at first sight. His face completely red, our boy shouts in anger, telling the slime to shut up and swearing he never thought anything of the sort. The next day, the combined troop of the Kenleys and Count Boss finally comes together to march toward the dangerous enemy army's territory. During the night, while Jaska slept soundly, Zach trained his strikes non-stop under the demanding slime's mental scolding. Focusing all his determination, he holds out his hand over an apple, and with a firm command, the gravitational force instantly crushes the fruit. Sura warns him that mastering that legendary magic won't be easy at all, since it's completely different from any common physical enhancement. Even so, our boy swears to himself that he'll master that technique at any cost so he can survive the war. And it doesn't take long for the group to reach the Kentless camp. On their arrival, the allied lord thanks them profusely for the military support. The ally explains that the enemy forces have been completely still at the top of the hill for 3 days, without giving any sign of movement or attack. Watching from a distance, our boy asks if the enemy army is really hidden in the middle of that fog, and analyzing the terrain, Carmen mutters that the allied forces are at a terrible disadvantage. The veteran explains that the enemy has a full view of their numbers and movements from up there, while they march blind against an army that's possibly larger. Grasping the gravity of the situation, the young man swallows hard. Suddenly, the conversation is interrupted by a loud commotion in the camp. A young nobleman enthusiastically celebrates the triumphant arrival of Count Boss and his men. The ally quickly introduces him as Count Kamska, and shows immense relief at seeing another influential warrior join the cause. The newcomer greets Zack cheerfully and asks about his father's health, which makes the boy feel a bit sad remembering his worthless old man. With a fiery speech, Kamska raises his fist and shouts to the troops that, despite the disadvantage, the arrival of the reinforcements guarantees the group's victory. The soldiers erupt in cheers and start celebrating. However, watching that nobleman out of the corner of his eye, our hero feels a strange unease and grows suspicious of his real intentions. That's when Suura's voice echoes in Zack's mind, stating that this smiling nobleman will soon become a traitor. Our boy nearly has a heart attack. Looking around carefully, Zack asks how the slime could be so certain of such a serious and outrageous accusation. Suura reveals that he possesses the legendary ability of precognition, able to see beyond ordinary time. The slime explains that his power lets him see the various branches of the future, and warns the boy that it's much better to be safe than to die early. Remembering that Kamska is very close to his father, and that the cowardly old man had curiously gone out of his way to avoid taking part in this war, Zack starts connecting the dots. He bitterly recalled the incident with the broken sword his father had given him. The terrible conclusion quickly forms in his mind. If Kamska is truly allied with his father, he'll definitely betray the kingdom and side with the enemies. That meant the enemy forces were directly tied to his father's diabolical plan to see him fall. The situation is desperate. If his father's and Kamska's betrayal came to light, the punishment for high treason would be merciless, leaving only public execution as their fate. In his worst nightmares, Zack saw himself being burned alive at the stake, alongside his entire cursed bloodline. Grinding his teeth, the young man swears to himself that he'll never let himself be destroyed or used by that miserable old man's traps. The boy then asks his partner what they should do from here on out to escape this situation. So Suura mentally projects the map of the battle, pointing out that in a normal fight, the group's only salvation would be to use a retreat route through the rear. However, if Kamska really does betray them from behind, they'll be mercilessly crushed in a pincer attack. The options were horrible: die fighting on the front lines, or survive only to be executed right after for his father's crime of treason. Backed against the wall, Zack pushes his mind to the limit, desperately trying to find a third way out. He analyzes every possible future Suura shows him, but all the branches seem to end tragically. Suddenly, a flash of genius hits him. Later that same night, the cold wind blew against the enemy banners on top of the hill. While most of the army rested in the camp's tents, Zack discreetly enters the main tent. After a brief conversation, Count Boss lurches in his chair, asking him to repeat the crazy thing he just said. The boy quickly looks around to make sure no one was spying on them. Slowly stepping closer to the nobleman, Zack leans in to speak in his ear. In an extremely low voice, the young lord asks for absolute secrecy about the bold plan. He explains that, given the absurd disadvantage of the troop, it would be beyond foolish to go through with the frontal attack. Dunkel Boss is surprised and asks what the real alternative would be, and without wasting time, Zack demands that only his squad be the one to fight the enemies. Meanwhile, outside, a hysterical shout echoes through the entire area. Turns out Jaska was thrilled about receiving Zack's night vision magic. Annoyed by his niece's unnecessary yelling in the middle of a stealth mission, Carmon quickly delivered a solid knock to the top of her head. Letting out an awkward laugh, the young man with glasses introduces himself in a friendly way as Cygnus Logzar, an elite subordinate of Count Boss. Shortly before they set out, Count Boss was still hesitant to let only the boys' squad carry out that incursion. He considers that the enemy might have its guard down since there hasn't been any combat in days and decides he'll bring the proposal to the allied lord, Kentless. However, Zack urges caution and insists that the Count make sure no one is within earshot when he goes to speak with the Lord. The young man explains that they can't risk the slightest leak of information, or the small attack party would easily be cornered. The Count starts seriously considering the frightening possibility that there is a spy embedded, passing tactical secrets to the enemy. Zack knows very well that the battle will be completely lost if Kamska decides to betray them and attack from behind. To make things worse, if his father was really involved in the plot, Zack would be executed for treason along with the entire family. So the only way to survive and cut ties with his cruel father was to eliminate the enemy commander before the battle even started. Though still hesitant, Count Boss ends up agreeing with the young lord's plan, but on the condition of sending Cygnus to support the mission. The nobleman guarantees that Cygnus Logsar has been well instructed not to get in the way. After all, Dunkel Boss knows that Zack has absurdly strong allies at his side, including the Sword Saint and the feared S-rank Lightning. The Count reflects to himself that, if this night raid succeeds, his own family's reputation and influence would rise dramatically. Now deep in the dense forest, our hero moves forward with his team. He swears to himself that he'll use every ounce of his strength to break free from his cursed fate. Carmon warns him that, even though they're few, the mission is still extremely dangerous, and any sentry that spots them will be the end of the group. That's when Suura calls the boy and tells him it's the perfect time for Zack to put his plan into action. With that, Zack orders the others to go ahead. Jaska is outraged and questions why she's being left behind, insisting she should stay right behind him to protect him. But the veteran Carmon steps in immediately and agrees to go on ahead, saying that their young master's orders must be followed. As soon as the trio moves away, the slime Suura pops out of Zack's clothes, activating his magical body reinforcement to make climbing easier. Our boy starts scaling a giant tree with total ease. From up high, the young man gets a perfect privileged view of the entire enemy camp. Meanwhile, the loud Jaska kept marching along. From his lookout, our boy spots the presence of an enemy sentry. Worried that loudmouth Jaska might give away their position, the young man panics. That's when the slime stretches out his gelatinous body and shows him a simple little rock. Zack questions if his partner really expects him to take someone down from that distance with such a tiny rock, but Sura says yes. With no other choice, our hero decides to put his body reinforcement magic to work, precisely picturing the path the rock should take to the target. The boy channels all his magical energy into the tip of his index finger. He hesitates at the thought that this could take a human life, but decides not to falter, and finally fires the projectile with all his strength. The enemy sentry doesn't even have time to understand what was happening, as the burst of energy whizzes through the woods. And in the blink of an eye, the impact shatters the poor guy's head. Hearing the sound of impact, Jaska runs over to the body and stares in awe when she realizes the young master managed to take down an enemy from that far away. While Zack was still processing the weight of that first kill, Sura scolds him to stop hesitating and get moving. The slime reminds him that the whole escape plan depends solely on Zack defeating the enemy commander personally. Activating his leg reinforcement magic to pick up speed, the young lord leaps from the tree. Moments later, huge flames of fire begin quickly consuming the first enemy tents. Seeing the young master arriving in the middle of the chaos, Jaska celebrates gleefully. The warrior yells for the enemy leader to show himself, when a massive soldier suddenly steps into their path. The brute mocks Jaska's beauty and lunges at her with a crushing bear hug, but Jaska is infinitely superior and, with one quick, ruthless swing of her weapon, cuts off both of the big guy's arms without breaking a sweat. Even without his limbs and spurting blood, the poor bastard tries to bite the young woman, but Carmen appears behind him and drives his blade through the monster's face. The veteran points to the middle of the tents and tells them to head that way. That's when Jaska asks if those curvy women were the commanders, which makes Carmen curse at her on the spot. Our hero realizes the leader is hidden among them and compares that despicable behavior to that of his own father. Then, a spoiled boy emerges, revealing himself as the true commander of the enemy forces. With that, Zack steps in blocking the boy's escape and announces his name, declaring he came to take the life of Alfred Astares. Without any hesitation, he swings a precise slash at the boy. Our hero stops his sword just inches from the enemy's neck. He reflects that, while that prince was born with a silver spoon and never had to fight for anything, he himself had the misfortune of being born into a family that always hated him. Even so, Zack realizes that his luck changed when he found true partners like the slime Sura, Carmon, Count Boss, and even the hot-tempered Jaska. With that, our boy asks himself whether he was really the unfortunate one, or if fate had just swapped their roles. Zack imagines that, if the circumstances were reversed, that spoiled little prince wouldn't think twice before executing him, and indeed, in one last act of cowardice, the boy tries to reach for a dagger to strike Zack by surprise from behind. But our boy reacts on instinct and pierces his chest. Our boy experiences for the first time the cold feeling of taking the life of someone right in front of him. Carmen steps up and instructs him to cut off the young prince's head to display it as the undeniable trophy of that raid's victory. Holding the boy's head by the hair, our hero listens, as the veteran announces loud and clear that Lord Zack Kenley has defeated the heir prince in combat. While Carmen orders all enemies to lay down their arms immediately, Zack raises the macabre trophy high. In complete shock, the enemy guards can't believe what happened. With no leadership or reason left to keep fighting, the enemy warriors start dropping their swords to the ground. Jaska leaps at her young master to give him a hug, warmly congratulating him on the perfect and extremely successful night raid. Sura points out that the boy managed to end the war, without the slime needing to resort to the legendary gravity magic they'd been practicing. With his head down, the boy timidly confesses that the victory was only possible because he had the huge luck of finding such incredible allies. With this historic feat, the name Zack Kenley echoes throughout the kingdom, allowing him to finally sever all ties with his cursed father. For his unmatched bravery on the battlefield, our boy earns everyone's respect and receives his own official title of Baron of those lands. But to understand the pieces that moved behind the scenes before this whole troop even came together, we need to go back a bit in time. This is Cleet Argent, a battle-hardened 58-year-old fighter who has already witnessed countless terrible clashes in his life. He was one of the few loyal employees still working under the orders of the declining and troubled Kenley family. Cleet knew very well that the Astara's army was on a completely surreal level of power, being a threat impossible for mere old men to defeat. Thinking about his own survival, the veteran prepared a resignation letter, deciding it was much better to be unemployed than to march to his death. He remembered bitterly that Baron Hendrik didn't even know his name, which buried any sense of duty or loyalty he might still have had toward that family. However, his plans to abandon the troop changed completely when young Zack shows up in his tent carrying a tray of food. Surprised, the old man asks if the young master really remembered him, to which Zack answers yes. The veteran is moved to see that the Baron's own son was also being forced to eat that tough, low-quality military ration bread. However, our boy smiles and explains that he's already used to it, revealing that dipping the food in the soup makes it much softer. Seeing the young master's sweetness and innocence in the face of such misery, the veteran feels his heart tighten. He wonders how he could just abandon the boy with that army of decrepit old men. Overcome by a strong sense of compassion, the veteran gets ready to speak with Zack, but the conversation is abruptly interrupted by Jaska, who shows up, rubbing her hungry stomach. Seeing such beauty, the old man tears his resignation letter to pieces and shouts that he'll fight with every ounce of his strength for his young master. And so, with such peculiar and lively companions at his side, Zack's improbable journey toward the highest glory finally takes off. Back to the present, Zack silently stares at the ashes and flames of the enemy camp that he himself helped mercilessly destroy. In front of him, several surviving enemy soldiers are tied to each other. Our hero silently reflects that all that carnage and destruction were caused directly by his own hands and strategic choices. He realizes that, to reach the top and survive, mountains of bodies will pile up in his path. Suddenly, Carmen snaps him back to reality, warning that the massive fire is spreading fast and they need to get out of there immediately. But Zack ignores him and asks if all that carnage had really been the best choice for everyone's survival. The experienced warrior fires back, saying that the kingdom of Astaris is the one in the wrong, reminding him that they invaded their lands and took the lives of innocent people. He firmly points out that this is the sad reality of war. The winners take everything, while the defeated lose even the right to exist. Understanding the pain and the weight on his young lord's shoulders, the giant steps closer and pulls him into a warm hug to comfort his heart. The veteran whispers with affection that, whether facing terrifying monsters or ruthless soldiers in future battles on the battlefield, he must never let his heart hesitate or waver, because in the end, it was thanks to that unity that they made it out of there alive. Later, under the pale light of the moon, the small troop finally gathers around the spoils of war. Cleet examines the collected riches and comments that war is an expensive business, but great victories always pay off. Jaska immediately questions who the nosy old man is. Sweating nervously, the veteran quickly introduces himself as Cleet, explaining that he's just another mercenary like the other old men. Carmon confirms that, except for him and his niece, all the other old men in the group really were hired to fight. And with the mission over, Zack realizes, a little melancholic, that this is the moment for them to go their separate ways. But to Zack's surprise, Cleet gives a wide smile and says he's looking forward to fighting alongside him in the next battle. Not understanding a thing, our boy asks what he's talking about, and the old man is surprised. He hasn't realized yet that all of them are going to stay with him. The veterans then reveal that they were hired by his late grandfather, Lord Otto, and that they will serve the young master faithfully until the end. Deeply moved to learn that his grandfather was still protecting him, even after death, Zack wipes away his tears and thanks both of them from the bottom of his heart. That's when Sura shows up all excited, announcing that, to make things even better, the boy has just gained a new companion. Looking ahead, our hero comes face to face with a majestic white horse. The slime reveals that this is the late Prince of Astaris' horse, and that now it belongs entirely to the young lord. Zack feels a bit awkward and confesses to his partner that unfortunately he doesn't even know how to ride a horse. But Sura assures him it's all fine, and suggests he make a blood pact with the animal, just like he did with him back in the woods. So the boy makes a small cut on his finger with the blade and touches the horse's forehead, ordering it to become his follower. In that very instant, an intense glowing magical aura surrounds the animal's entire body, sealing the contract between them. After the glow fades, a silence takes over the place. Suddenly, the horse's eyes light up, and it speaks to Zack mentally, saying it can now understand its master perfectly. Excited, Sura quickly corrects the boy, revealing that this creature wasn't a common horse, but a legendary Altair horse. He explains that it's a winged beast capable of flight that, while young, perfectly disguises itself as a normal horse. While the slime celebrates their huge luck in finding such a beast, Zack is stunned to learn that he has a rare monster for a mount. With an almost human smile, the animal asks the young lord to forget common names and give him a name worthy of him. The boy then puts his hand on his chin and starts thinking of something that fits his new partner. In seconds, Zack points at the animal and asks if he'd like to be called Alta. The horse neighs on the spot, deeply thanking his master for the beautiful name he just received. Our boy then asks if he can try riding him now, and Alta answers right away. Shortly after, Zack happily rides through the woods on his new friend. Suddenly, Count Boss appears in the middle of the trees, praising the young lord's beautiful and imposing mount. The nobleman comments that Zack's victory over the Prince of Astaris will certainly bring a legendary reward for the clan. However, changing his expression, the boy says he needs to speak with him about something extremely important. Now in the mansion's office, the Count asks if he really understands the gravity of what he's asking. Looking the nobleman straight in the eyes, Zack firmly declares that he wants to cut all ties with the Kendley family for good. He explains that ever since the engagement with Kellis was broken off, his father had constantly humiliated him, forcing him to live in a rundown barn. Dunkelboss is completely horrified to learn that the boy suffered so much cruelty just because of a broken engagement. Zack also reveals that, since his beloved grandfather's death, he wasn't even allowed to have dinner with the rest of his family. He explains that, because of his black eyes, he was treated worse than a worm, and when it came time to march, they sent him off to die. The Count knows that mediating this situation and helping the young man break his family ties could ruin his diplomatic relationship with the Kendley clan for good. However, looking at it from another angle, the nobleman realizes that risk could bring unexpected long-term advantages. Weighing the arrogant Ken leads against the promising Zack, he sees that the young man has the potential to found and lead his own dynasty in the future. So the Count decides to help him right there, letting him know he'll be calling in this huge favor at some point down the line. A month has passed since the day the boy finally severed all his ties with the hateful and cowardly Kenley family. To crown their war achievements, our hero and his allies head straight to the royal palace to receive their proper reward from the king. Before the throne, the king congratulates the commander on his brilliant victory against the enemy army, gifting him 100 valuable gold coins. In that kingdom, the large gold coins carry an absurd value, capable of buying entire lands and securing a life of luxury. Right after that, the royal herald calls forward the commoner, Zack. The king praises the young man's bravery for defeating the heir prince of Astaris and, as a reward, officially names him Baron of Rohista. The monarch decrees that, from this defining moment on, the young master will be known by everyone as Zack Rohista. With that, the boy thanks him deeply for the enormous honor he has been granted. After the ceremony ends, Count Boss gives him a friendly pat on the back and congratulates him on the new title. However, the Count's expression quickly shifts, and he warns the young man that things won't be so easy. He reveals that the lands of Rohista are extremely problematic, and that the boy will soon be given all the details on his new domain. Eager to understand the mystery, Zack opens the doors and is invited into a room where he'll receive the information about his fief. There, a beautiful assistant in glasses explains that the territory is flat and fertile, with abundant rivers, plentiful harvests, and 2,000 inhabitants. Thinking the place is perfect, the young man asks if there's any problem there. She then points to the map and reveals that the territory of Rohista borders directly to the north with the enemy forces of Astares. The boy swallows hard, realizing he'll be neighbors with his greatest rivals. But to make the poor guy's situation even worse, the assistant takes a deep breath and warns that there's another crucial detail about those lands. She shows him that the eastern region borders the feared demon territory, a dangerous land full of wild and deadly monsters. Alone in the enormous hall, the boy starts to digest the awful news and connect the dots about his new home. He soon curls up on the floor of the room, lamenting that he was given the worst land imaginable in the entire kingdom. That's when Sura shows up and tells the boy to stop whining, insisting that he think carefully about the advantages of all this. Hunting wild monsters is synonymous with a lot of money, so he encourages the young man to focus on hunting as soon as possible. Well, our boy finds his partner's reasoning way too optimistic for reality. Besides that, Zack reflects that on top of facing wild monsters, he now needs to figure out how to govern that fertile land. He knows that warriors like Karman and Jaska are great in a fight, but totally useless when it comes to the bureaucracy of running a government. And Sura fully agrees with him, admitting he's absolutely right about that. With that, the little creature announces that there's only one smart way out to solve the impasse. The slime suggests they hire public servants. But to Zack's surprise, an enormous crowd of candidates soon appears, begging for a chance to work in the new fief. The boy doesn't understand the commotion. Realizing the golden opportunity in front of him, our hero decides to take advantage of the moment to interview the most promising candidates. First in line is Renji, a warrior all wrapped in bandages who proudly shows off an S-rank medal, saying he's a rival of the legendary Karman. Zack is impressed to find another S-rank, and, even though the guy isn't a bureaucrat, decides he can't pass up someone that strong. With a huge smile on his face, our boy raises his fist and gets ready to announce that the bandaged warrior is hired. Suddenly, a strong blow echoes through the room as Carmon appears out of nowhere and knocks out the candidate with a single strike to the head. Carmen grumbles that he's never seen this fraud and that a real S-rank wouldn't go down in a single hit. Pointing at the liar, the veteran warns that he's just a scammer trying to squeeze easy money out of the new lord. The young lord then asks if the veteran is sure about that. That's when a charismatic blonde girl examines the fraud's medallion and confirms that the S-rank emblem is completely fake. She starts babbling nonstop about the details of the source and the real marks that genuine insignias should have, which leaves Zack completely dizzy. Our boy then asks who exactly she is. Caught off guard by her new lord's direct question, the blonde jumps up and introduces herself as Cecily Isminas, a servant candidate who guarantees she knows medallions and insignias like no one else. Cecily keeps talking frantically about her obsession with the details of each emblem, even realizing that the girl is a total medallion maniac. Zack concludes that her knowledge will be extremely useful in the fief, so he interrupts her rambling and tells her she's hired. The next candidate is Zelda Endeavor, a fighter who formally introduces himself as an aspiring military officer. From a distance, Carmen buzzes with joy and guarantees that, unlike the fraud, Zelda is an A-rank warrior, elite archer, and great strategist. Fully trusting his experienced mentor's approval, the young lord hires the elite warrior on the spot with great satisfaction. Next up comes Angelina Zalfar, a young finance specialist who offers to present a detailed report on his expenses. She points out that they're spending money recklessly, citing the absurd expenses on food. The young woman insists that Zack put financial control in her hands, warning that the fief will fall to ruin if they keep going like this. Curious, our hero asks why she's so eager to join him in this dangerous land, and Angelina responds that she's the kind of person who prefers to take on big challenges head-on to grow. Knowing very well that managing the gold is vital, the boy hires her on the spot, The next candidate is James Ashen, a young man who introduces himself as an agricultural development specialist. Zack finds the guy too apathetic and worriedly asks if he'll be able to handle the threats and dangers of the territory. But James explains that Monsterland tends to be extremely fertile, guaranteeing he's eager to prosper in that soil. Impressed by such initiative, our hero hires him immediately, eager to see his lands prosper. Right after, the herald calls the next candidate, who enters the room with an exaggerated bow. The man has a rather intriguing look and keeps glancing around suspiciously. He introduces himself as Oscar Lim and shows off a first-class alchemist medallion, which makes Cecily lose it. Turns out the Alchemists Guild has a very strict rank system, where first class is reserved for very few people. Cecily starts babbling about the rare arcane inscriptions on the item, begging Zack to hire that genius on the spot. With so many arguments, Zack hires Oscar. Later, the new party sets out together on a long journey toward the dangerous territory of Rohista. Mounted on Alta, our boy reflects on the riches they're carrying, and Sura ironically thanks the rivals from Astaris for all of it. Suddenly, Carmon tells everyone to stop. The experienced warrior calls for absolute silence so they don't draw trouble. Before the group, a colossal, disgusting creature appears, crawling over the dense foliage of the forest. Carmen warns that the beasts will get more and more violent as they get closer to the fief. However, to the warrior's total horror, Jaska's stomach growls loudly. Hearing the noise, the hideous beast slowly turns its head and fixes its glowing eyes directly on them. Zack quickly draws his blade to defend himself, but before he can attack, a rain of arrows hits the monster, making the enormous creature drop in seconds. From the shadows, warriors wearing animal fur hoods and wielding dangerous metal claws appear. Spotting the symbol they carry, Cecily quickly points and recognizes that the group belongs to the famous Nail Pullers clan. She calms the group down by explaining that, although they're bandits, they only hunt monsters and loot the dead. Even so, the aide feels there's something very strange in the air. Suddenly, one of the hooded archers aims his bow directly at Cecily, and in the blink of an eye, an arrow whizzes dangerously past the poor girl's face. Angry Zack points at the bandits and shouts that they were clearly trying to kill them. Without hesitation, he draws his new sword and tells them to back off if they want to stay alive. But before charging forward, the young lord freezes as he hears the call of his slime partner. Sura reminds the boy that those invaders are just mere road bandits. The slime suggests capturing the criminals to use them as slave labor, pointing out that the new fief needs workers. Zack agrees with the plan and immediately orders his team to neutralize the enemies without taking anyone's life. Zelda finds the order to spare the enemies tough to pull off given so many bandits, but decides to act anyway. With extreme skill, he pulls several arrows at the same time and fires precisely, pinning the targets close to the trees. Zack cheers the archer's aim, but Zelda warns that his arrows are running out, opening space for Oscar to step in. The alchemist pulls out mysterious flasks from his coat and hurls them at the bandits, who immediately fall asleep from the sedatives. With a quick pull, they manage to tie up the sleeping enemies all at once. James explains that this plant is a spiderweb ivy, used especially as a trap to bind intruders. Watching the group's efficiency, Sura is quite satisfied to see that the new recruits are indeed very competent. The slime then gives Zack the green light to use his gravity magic to end this quickly, but warns him to go easy and not end up taking anyone's life. Focusing his power, the boy activates the gravity magic with full force. Standing before a freshly formed crater, the new allies can barely believe their young lord's terrifying level of power. Cecily praises Zack's impressive feat. Soon after, the criminals start complaining bitterly about having missed the huge chance to become nobles of that region. That's when the attentive Cecily walks over and focuses her gaze on a small accessory the prisoners were carrying. She reveals that the pendant is directly associated with the Kenley family, but to everyone's surprise, the aide quickly reveals that the items are completely forged, which sends the bandits into panic. When questioned, the leader of the criminals confesses that a nobleman promised to give them the title if they assassinated the young lord. Seeing how far his former family's cruelty could go, Zack is completely enraged. But instead of punishing them, our boy surprises everyone by offering them honest work in Rohista, with housing and a fair salary for all of them. Angelina quickly runs the financial numbers and offers a great amount, leaving the criminals in disbelief at being given a chance to start over. The bandits' leader cries, thanking them for finally being treated with dignity. And so, accompanied by his new and peculiar allies, the group continues the journey toward their new promised land. The territory of Rohista is an extremely fertile land, but surrounded by two great dangers that threaten the peace of the place. Soon, the group is surrounded by a terrifying horde of bizarre monsters. Jaska charges full force at the beasts, complaining about the absurd number of creatures that live near the demon territory. While the fight rages in the background, Oscar ignores the danger and starts collecting rare mushrooms from the ground. Annoyed by the distraction, Jaska questions why the alchemist is even there, and the young lord explains that he insisted on helping. And that's how the official monster subjugation squad took shape. Then, Oscar prepares one of his chemical mixtures and hurls the flask straight at the beasts. A blinding flash of light hits the area, temporarily blinding the group. Despite the shock, the beasts drop unconscious instantly, and while Carmon praises the efficiency of the bomb, Oscar rushes over to collect the horns. Next, the alchemist uses another of his bombs to blow up a minotaur, eager to extract the creature's liver. Ignoring his companion's protests, he keeps melting several monsters along the way to collect rare ingredients. Out of patience with the explosions, Jaska loses it and rushes at Oscar, giving the alchemist a solid beating. Watching the mess, the old man walks over to his lord and suggests it would be much better to keep the two on separate teams, to which Zack agrees on the spot, but the young man reflects that, if the two of them really worked together, they'd make an unbeatable duo against any threat. However, seeing the girl yelling and chasing the alchemist, he realizes that getting them to cooperate would be a true miracle. Suddenly, the ground shakes violently, and a colossal earth dragon emerges from the depths. Seeing the stone monster, Oscar is thrilled to remember that the creature's head holds extremely rare medicinal materials. Zack asks if the alchemist knows the beast's weak point, but his silence forces Jaska to charge in alone. To back up his ally, the young lord activates his gravity magic, forcing the stone monster against the ground. Our boy gives the order to attack and rushes forward at extreme speed, leaping into the air to drive his sword straight into the monster's eye. But to his total horror, his blade simply cracks against the terrifying beast's impenetrable armor. The dragon then roars, calling in some allies from the forest. Seeing the situation slipping out of control, Sura says there's no other way out and that she'll help him face the beasts. But before acting, the little creature tells the young man to hide immediately. Next, the little slime leaps into combat and begins a magical transformation. His gelatinous form starts shifting rapidly in the air, molding curves and clothes in an unbelievable way. With a radiant look, Sura reveals her official human form, calling herself the dedicated secretary of the young lord. While Jaska tries to figure out where that girl came from, the other monsters of the forest charge at her, but the secretary, with a single motion of her hands, decapitates one of the bulky monsters without breaking a sweat. Then she leaps at high speed toward the rest of the beasts. Sura spins in the air like a real hurricane, slicing through dozens of enemies at once while blowing kisses to the survivors. Walking calmly through the rain of blood, the young woman shows off a frightening level of composure. Seeing this, Jaska swallows her pride and admits she wouldn't stand a chance in combat against the slime. Pointing at the gigantic earth dragon, Sura cheerfully announces that the young lord will defeat it all on his own. The sudden declaration leaves Zack, Jaska, and Oscar completely shocked. The boy panics, remembering that neither his sword nor his gravity magic had any effect on the monster's shell. However, the secretary reminds the young man that he still has one last powerful ace up his sleeve. She's referring to the legendary creation magic and encourages the boy to materialize a blade so sharp it can cut through anything. Zack complains that it's easy to say, since he was never able to successfully activate that spell in any of his previous training. But Sura insists that he has to make it happen, now that his life really depends on it. She explains that the secret to the spell is in the clarity of his mental image. Mustering his courage, the boy closes his eyes and starts concentrating intensely to visualize the perfect weapon. From a distance, Carmen panics and shouts at the young man not to close his eyes in front of the enemy. But Zack ignores him and focuses all his determination on his own mental space. Hundreds of imaginary blades appear around him until he picks and wields the perfect model with all his magical conviction. Suddenly, the dragon lunges by surprise and bites the spot where the young man was, sending everyone into panic. But from the middle of the dust, Zack delivers a devastating upward slash using his brand new, brilliant creation. With unimaginable cutting power, the enormous earth dragon is perfectly split in half. Seeing the beast destroyed, the troop goes wild, celebrating the unbelievable victory. Admiring the incredible shining blade he just materialized with his magic, our boy decides to name his powerful weapon, Graham. In that very instant, the sword glows intensely and speaks mentally with Zack, swearing eternal loyalty and promising to serve him well from that moment on. So, a few days go by, and in his new office, Angelina, the finance specialist, she excitedly announces that they've finished processing the Earth Dragon's remains, which will bring them a gigantic profit. Soon, a crowd forms in front of the fief's mansion. The boy is amazed to see so many candidates for public servants and wonders why there's such sudden interest in working there. Carmon then explains that it's all because of the Earth Dragon. Turns out, by defeating the beast alone, Zack received the valuable title of Dragon Slayer. The veteran adds that having a lord with such fame brought prestige to Rohista, attracting numerous talented candidates. Cecily points out that what they need most now is a commander, to which Carmen says he has the perfect person for the position. He introduces Kelly Hooligan, a warrior with A-rank sword skills and the ability to lead entire units, surpassing Jaska. Zack hires her on the spot, and Cecily calculates that with the new soldiers, they already have enough to form a full company. The young lord then asks if there's anyone else who stands out, and his gaze is drawn to a small and shy witch. The little girl hides nervously behind the other people, but she ends up getting squeezed and shoved to the front. One of the guards mistakes her for a lost child, but the little girl insists that she's there to apply for a job, revealing herself as Lisa Lire, a 16-year-old sorceress. Turns out, Lisa is one of the best mages in the Sorcerer's Guild, with plenty of talent to become a sage, a rank that's nearly out of reach. To prove her worth, she manipulates all four elements at once. Sura then insists that Zack hire her, and the boy, seeing her potential, accepts on the spot. That's when Angelina interrupts him with urgent news. She reveals that the fief is in serious financial trouble. Angelina explains that one of the biggest expenses is holding back the flow of monsters coming from the demon lands. Of the 300 large gold coins they bring in, 230 go just to the army, a huge burden on the fief. And to make things worse, they need to build a defensive fortress, which will cost 700 gold coins. The problem is that the monsters are using the gap left by the Earth Dragon to disrupt the construction. Suddenly, a horde of monsters storms the place. Commander Kelly shouts for everyone to form teams of 5 and focus only on defense. She splits up the elite members like Carmen, Zelda, Lisa, Jaska, and Oscar into different teams to cover every front. Cecily is impressed by Kelly's speed and strategy, especially for splitting Jaska and Oscar up. Sura then points to the battlefield, showing something to her lord. It was Lisa, who while leading her men to their death, was cackling like a psychopath. Kelly is shocked by all of it, but realizes that Lisa's madness, which promised rewards for both victory and defeat, ended up boosting the soldiers' morale. But the calm doesn't last, because a thunderous sound echoes through the forest. A colossal stone hand crushes the fortress wall, and from the shadows, a massive mithril golem appears. The creature is a legendary monster, even larger than the Earth Dragon. Sura then announces that Zack will lure the golem out and destroy it on his own. The boy has no idea how to defeat it, but Sura tells him to use his head, reminding him that mental imagery is the key to creation magic. As the monster approaches, Zack uses his gravity magic, multiplying the golem's weight by 10, but the creature keeps advancing without any difficulty. Sura explains that even at 10 times their weight, golems move easily. With no other option, he summons his sword, Graham, and goes on the direct attack. The young man delivers a powerful strike against the monster's leg, but the attack only leaves a scratch. He realizes he'll need reinforcement magic and a lot more power to pierce that shell. That's when Graham suggests that the golem must have a core, a weak point they can exploit. Zack quickly locates the core in the monster's chest, but the smooth mithril surface and the height make it impossible to climb up there. He then remembers Sura's advice about mental imagery and has a brilliant idea. With his creation magic, he doesn't create an object, but a hole in the ground. The golem sinks into the crater, leaving its core vulnerable and within Zack's reach. The boy reflects that creation magic isn't limited to creating matter. If he can imagine it, he can create anything. Sura is impressed, because he didn't just create a hole, he used the displaced earth to repair the fortress walls at the same time. Zack explains that it was easier to visualize the earth being shaped and moved than to simply make a hole appear out of nothing. Now, with the monster trapped and the fort secure, he prepares for the finishing blow, and with a single strike from Graham, destroys the golem's core. Cecily and Sura celebrate, saying he finished the fort, made a moat, and killed the golem, hitting 3 birds with 1 stone. But Sura corrects him, saying it was actually 4, because he also earned his companion's trust. Angelina realizes that, with the golem's mithril, they can finish the fortress. Sometime later, a royal messenger arrives, envying Zack's rapid rise. Zack, a bit embarrassed, says it was just luck. But setting that aside, the messenger unrolls a scroll. The messenger announces that, to celebrate the subjugation of the Earth Dragon and the gifts of mithril, Zack Rohista will be officially promoted to Viscount. Sura and the messenger list his feats: the fort, the moat, the allies' trust, the promotion, and the profit, hitting 5 birds with 1 stone. And that's how, in the blink of an eye, he not only escaped his financial troubles, but also became a Viscount. Days later, Sura shows up all excited, offering her lord a magical rejuvenation potion. But Zack, already fed up and with a bloated stomach, complains that he's already drunk hundreds of them and doesn't need an announcement every time. Ignoring the drama, she encourages him by saying they're in the final stretch of the project. And so, for 2 months, our boy barely slept, building a huge wall to protect the city from the monsters of the demon lands. While Lisa and Kelly praise the feat, Sura points out that the place is still vulnerable to flying beasts, and suggests he create a magical item to repel them. For that, she shoves another mana potion into the poor guy's mouth, and shows him she has hundreds, or rather, thousands of them, to keep him working nonstop, which leaves the boy terrified. Sura encourages him, saying the more things he can make, the higher he'll rise. Over time, using materials from the monsters, Oscar created secret potions that were gifted to the king, and with that, Zack was promoted again, this time to Count, but the rapid rise in status leaves him dazed, and he can't focus. Suddenly, Carmen enters the room, announcing the arrival of a group of dwarves who wanted to settle in his territory. Their leader explains that they heard about the defeat of the mithril golem, which indicated the existence of a mine of that precious metal in the demon lands. For dwarves, working with mithril is a great honor, and they ask to serve as artisans in those lands. The dwarf points out that their presence would also be very advantageous for the fief. He lists his skills, which range from mithril mining and processing to construction and crafting items from monster leather. Angelina quickly sees the opportunity and lets Zack know that the deal is extremely favorable. Under pressure, but knowing the dwarves' fame as the best artisans, the boy gives in. The dwarves then get to work immediately, building their own houses with impressive speed. Sura celebrates, saying that with the new residents, the value of Roji stock has gone up even more, which, to Zack's dismay, meant that the monster repellent was becoming even more necessary. While Sura commented on how smoothly the integration of the dwarves went, the young lord gets distracted by a commotion outside. In the streets, a beast woman, dressed in rags, was trembling with fear, while the residents whispered, saying the most absurd nonsense about her. Without thinking twice, Zack runs over to her, asking what happened. He brings her inside, and once in bed, the girl introduces herself as Paroma, a representative of her people. She reveals that she came from Astaris, hoping her people could relocate to the lands of Rohista. In Astaris, beast folk are considered subhuman, and with the civil war, the persecution against them and other tribes has begun. They're being sent to the front lines of battle, used only as meat shields. That's why, for the beast folk, Zack, the man who killed the heir of Astaris, is seen as a true savior. But Angelina warns him, taking in refugees is risky and could draw the wrath of Astaris, on top of causing problems with the local residents. Even so, without hesitating, the young lord makes his decision and says he'll take them in. He then starts to explain that, although humans and beast folk are different, they've suffered just as he has suffered, and that's why he wants to help them. Sura praises him, and Angelina, though reluctant, accepts her lord's order. Moved, Paroma thanks him and says there's no time to waste. But when she tries to stand up, she stumbles and falls. Zack catches her and asks what caused such weakness, and she tells him that she came through the northern mountains. That route is infested with swarms of wyverns and griffins, which forced her to stay hidden throughout the long journey. He understands she had to go that way to avoid being detected by Astaris, and decides to help her recover. Using his magic, he strengthens her, and the girl is amazed to feel her body fill with strength again. Zack explains that it's a body reinforcement magic and that the effect should last for about 20 days. He's happy to have trained so much, since he can now use this ability on other people. Sura then hurries them along, but Paroma hesitates, remembering that the path will require them to fly. Hearing that, Zack's partner bursts into laughter, saying it's all fine. After all, their lord is a master of creation magic, and with a single gesture, he creates a path across the gorge, which leaves the girl completely stunned. Surat explains that the path will be necessary so the other beastfolk can make the crossing safely. Meanwhile, our boy is once again being drowned in mana potions by his partner. Shortly after, they finally arrive at the beast folks' camp. The group's leader, an imposing lion man named Leon, introduces himself and thanks them for the help. Zack then says he'll take them in without questions, but with a single condition. In his territory, there will be no discrimination, but everyone, without exception, must follow the law. He asks if they swear to obey it. Leon then agrees, saying that if there's no discrimination, there's no problem, and gives his word. With the agreement sealed, Zack says he'll welcome them with open arms. Now, with that matter also resolved, Sura reminds him that the only thing left to do is create the much-dreaded monster repellent. She instructs him to imagine a cube that emits sounds, smells, and auras unpleasant to beasts, and rushes him, saying that if he doesn't focus, the newly arrived beastfolk will be attacked. The boy sounds cold as he thinks about the difficulty of creating something he's never seen. But looking at the dwarves and beastfolk, he remembers that he now has a people to protect, and that gives him the motivation he was missing. With the image of all of them in his mind, he focuses on his desire to protect, channeling all his energy and determination. He finally manages to use his creation magic. A glowing cube appears in his hands, and he wonders if he pulled it off. Sura celebrates, confirming that the item is emitting a repulsive wave to monsters. She asks if he can feel it, and the boy agrees, worried about whether it affects her, since she's also a monster. But Sura assures him it has no effect on her, but that it'll be extremely effective against weaker beasts. With the first piece done, she gets him ready for another round of potions. The plan was to create several cubes, each with a radius of 2 kilometers, and spread them around Rohista and along the roads. After exhausting work, Sura congratulates him and warns him. With the repellents and the beastfolk, the monsters will be diverted toward Astares, which would be a declaration of war. But Zack states that he's prepared for the consequences. Sura then comments, excitedly, that more and more cuties are joining his group of followers, and compares the situation to a dating simulator, which leaves the boy completely confused. Sura explains that it's a game where he can choose his favorite heroine from among all the ones that appear. She tells him to imagine, starting with the first girl, Jaska, the energetic and athletic one. She imagines an event where Jaska invites him out if he's bored, but Zack complains that he wanted a gentler girl, since the date with Jaska would be at a karate dojo to wreck the place. Then Sura introduces the next one, Cecily, the gentle and airheaded one. But the date with her would be at a cemetery, to look for rare emblems, which completely puts him off. He says he just wanted something normal, like getting tea. That's when the last option appears, Angelina, the tsundere president, where she invites him for coffee. But the date with her turns out to be an economics lesson, where she forbids him from ordering anything without a coupon, and suggests they just drink water, since it's free. The boy concludes that, although being frugal is good, the situation isn't romantic at all. Hearing the word romantic, Sura gets excited and says that in that case, there's only one option left for him. And that option is Lisa, the lowly queen, who, in an authoritative way, tells him to bark for her like a little puppy. Sura bursts into laughter, saying he has many options, but there's still one last heroine missing. Curious, the boy asks who it would be, and his partner describes her as the perfect heroine. That's when she points to herself. She then shows off, saying she's the flawless heroine, with beauty, charm, and unmatched skills. But the boy's reaction isn't what she expected, and she, irritated, asks if he isn't satisfied with the choice. He explains that to him, Sura is more than a heroine. She is his family, someone special to whom he owes his life, his partner.